Hello, Ian with PokerAtlas here today to bring you our second Title 31 video, Transaction Logging. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the transaction log and show you multiple places to log transactions. Finally, I'm going to show you how to log a transaction for an uncarded player. It's important to note that reporting and tracking of totals will be covered in a future video. Starting from the TableCaptain main menu, I'm going to navigate to the Cashier section to find the transaction log. On a fresh business day, this is what your transaction log will look like. The top portion is where you would see a list of all logged transactions, while the bottom is where you can view transaction details or log new transactions. The drop-down menu offers different ways to sort or view historical data. To log a new transaction for a carded player, start by clicking the New button in the bottom portion of the log. This is both your logging window and your transaction details window. At the top, you'll notice an aggregate total. To the right of that will be all of your automatically tracked information. The next section will tell you if the transaction was cash in and what it was for, or cash out and where it was from. It will also give you location if the player happened to be seated at a table. The middle section offers descriptive information for tracking of uncarded players, and the bottom is used to look up a carded patron, or if the transaction is already linked to a player, we'll show that player's information. We're going to start by searching for a player to attach this transaction to. I will search for myself and hit select. You can now see that all of my information has populated into the details of this transaction. If we click edit, we can now add a monetary figure to the transaction. In this case, I'm going to log a cash in of $1,250 for casino checks. It is important to note that the options in the for and from dropdowns are straight from the CTR form itself, so this tool will line up perfectly with your reporting procedures. Clicking Save will now update my aggregate total at the top right of the details section. Clicking the new Link Transaction button will allow me to log another transaction for the player associated with the highlighted transaction. In this case, myself again. This time I'm going to cash a check for $500 at the cage. Situations like these are perfect to utilize the document description fields. In this case, I'm going to put in a check number and a bank name. As you can see, both of our log transactions show up in my aggregate total. Take note that all tournament buy-ins and payouts are logged for you automatically, as well as any promotional wins. Those numbers, while being totaled in the aggregate numbers, will also be shown separately in the top right. I'm now going to show you how to log a transaction for player maintenance. For main menu, navigate to player maintenance and search for your player. Once you have your player highlighted, click the log transaction button at the top of the screen. This is the player transaction log window that will show up everywhere you can log transactions outside of the transaction log. It shows your aggregate totals at the top, your information indicators in the top left, a list of all of the gaming days transactions for that player, and a total of your auto-track transactions at the bottom. In order to log a new transaction, click New, and a window with the top section of your transaction log details will appear. Log the transaction appropriately and hit Save, and both windows will close. Clicking the transaction log again allows me to quickly verify that the transaction logged successfully. There are three main ways you can log transactions from the waitlist screen. After navigating to the waitlist, the first way to do so is through a player lookup. You can do this using a manual search or scanning a card. Once I have selected my player, you can see in the player entry window that there is a transaction log button next to the player name. Click this to bring up the player transaction log window. Log the appropriate transaction and hit Save to finish logging. Closing this screen, I'm going to show you how to log the transaction through the table view. If we click on Table 1, you can see that our player is in Seat 8. Click on Seat 8 and you can see a Log Transaction button in the Player Information window. If you click that, it will bring up the player transaction log. Take note that all of the transactions we've entered show up in order in the list. Go ahead and log any transactions and click Save. The last place to log transactions in the waitlist view is from our seated list. Click More and navigate to the seated players list. Find the player you want, highlight him, and click Transaction Log. It is important to notice in the list that once a player is seated, any logged transactions from this view will automatically stamp table and seat numbered at the transaction. Once again, log any transactions, and when you save, the window will close. I would now like to show you how to log a transaction for a non-carded player and how to link that transaction to a carded player after the fact. Navigate back to the transaction log and click New to start an unlinked transaction. This time we will use the descriptive information fields to describe the player in question. In this case, our unknown player is going to cash out $2,000 at the cage. After we save, you can see the transaction at the top of the screen with the descriptive information. In order to attach this transaction to a player, click Edit and then click Lookup, search for your player, and hit Select, and it will update the log with the appropriate player number and name. It is also important to note that all of the players' aggregate totals will now be included with the $2,000 cash out that just occurred. That wraps up our transaction logging video. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos from PokerAtlas.